our storyteller today. So again, really great to see everyone. Just want to say good morning and afternoon. I'm again honored to be here with all of you today. As I said, joining us for the virtual Native Storytelling series. My name is Steve Steiny. I'm one of the program managers here at the American Indian Alaskan Native National HTC. We are funded by SAMHSA. I do have my colleague Natasha Peterson on the line as well to assist with any technical issues and to help monitor the chat box. I want to say too that the content of today's broadcast is created by the presenter and does not represent the views of SAMHSA, HHS, or the National American Indian Alaska Native HTC. And before we get started today, we wanted to acknowledge the current political climate. We know that this is a stressful time for many, and that we may have those on the call today with differing opinions. We just want to remind everyone that, as always, just to be respectful of one another. It's important that we have a safe and welcoming, supportive environment. With that, I want to say that I'm very honored to once again introduce Mr. Richard Zane Smith, our storyteller for today's broadcast. Mr. Smith will be facilitating our session for today and for 2 more sessions following today on a bi-weekly schedule. As I mentioned last week, Richard is an enrolled member of the Wyandotte Nation of Kansas, which is not federally recognized, and he is a IACB certified Indian artisan. He's active in the Wyandotte language and culture revitalization, longhouse ceremonies, and spent 7 years teaching Wyandotte language and storytelling in the Wyandotte public schools. Mr. Smith's second story today is called Revenge and Dishonor. He shared with me that it's about a mixed tribal group that went to recapture their stolen horses and the ensuing mayhem and an unforgettable lesson that resulted. At the close of our time today, we will be posting a short link to our evaluation in the chat box. Please take a few minutes to fill this out. Your feedback is very important to us, and we would appreciate that. It also helps keep our funding in place so that we can continue to provide events like this at no cost. If you're unable to complete the survey during today's event, we will reach out to you via email within a few days and provide another opportunity for you to complete that survey. We are going to save the chat conversation today, so just be aware and mindful as you write comments in the chat section. We will remove any sensitive information from the chat document accordingly. We just want to also remind you that we will be recording today's event, so that if you miss the event or have a colleague or a friend or family member that missed the event, we'll have that available in our HTC YouTube archive, which is available. I have that link. It's also located on our website. You're currently muted, as you know. You can use the unmute feature in the top right portion of your Zoom box, or in the lower left-hand portion of your settings screen. If you have any technical problems, please type those into the chat box, and Natasha and I will try and assist you as quickly as we can. So before I turn the floor over, I just want to say that our next storytelling event will be held December 8th at 2 p.m. Central. And I believe that story is regarding a pet snake. So that should be an interesting story as well. So stay tuned for that one. And with that, I want to turn the floor over to my friend, Richard Zane Smith, our storyteller for today. Thank you.
Kwekwe materu. Sohahio, Ejatse, Richard Zane Smith. Ne akwaya. Awaya tontore daiju utaskwe konhe. Awakan shutas. I just want to welcome you all here. My name is Richard Zane Smith, and Sohahio is my longhouse name that was given to me. And just wanted to say I'm really glad everyone's here. And I'm going to share a story, maybe some more, but I want to give a little historical kind of context with it too. These are historical stories. The last one was more of a historical story that was passed down through families of something that happened in the Detroit area when the Wyandottes were there. Because the Wyandottes are kind of a small tribe, they're often overlooked a lot. And so there's a lot of history that probably a lot of Americans don't really know. But some of them, a major group of them actually settled in the middle of Ohio back in the very early 1700s. And they were there until the removal. And that's what we'll be talking about a little bit today, is the removal and a little what happened after that removal into Kansas. But they did enjoy being, Ohio was a wonderful place, really fertile hunting grounds, and also a place that was great for growing crops. And so they kept their longhouse tradition, going strong until settlers began to encroach, and then there became problems. One of the things that did happen is that the Shawnee people had moved out of Ohio, and they'd actually gone east, and the Wyandotte welcomed them back into Ohio when the border became a little more hostile to them in the east. So the Shawnee never forgot that. The Delaware, also coming from Pennsylvania, they were being persecuted there in Pennsylvania, so they found a place there in Ohio when the Wyandottes let them in, allowed them a place to. The removal was pretty brutal. It wasn't quite as bad, maybe you'd say, as the Cherokee Trail of Tears, but you know how it is. I mean, everybody's horror story in their life is their horror story, and it's just as bad. You can't say one person's pain is less than another's, because it's still your own. And a lot of trauma came out of that. The pressure to move just became so strong, and the Wyandotte there in Ohio were pretty much living like a lot of the settlers. Some of the Wyandotte people actually had glass windows even before settlers did in their cabins. Some of them were building with bricks. They had schools. They had switched over to plowing with steel plows. They had a mill, and it's still there, actually. They're in Sandusky, Upper Sandusky, Ohio. They have, so they were actually embracing a lot of the ways that Europeans brought, and were living there, and they thought they'd get along fine. However, they did have traditions where they would leave the reservations, which got smaller and smaller every time a treaty was made with the Americans. The reservation got smaller and smaller, but they did have usually had some kind of a qualification in that treaty where they could go out and hunt, because the reservation was small. They could go out and hunt, and they could also go out and tap sugar trees in those months when the sap was flowing. And there was one instance where Wyandotte and his family went up to gather sap, and the men would trap at that time too. While the women were tapping trees, the men were out trapping, and the whole family was massacred by a couple of white European Americans that pretended as if they had no place to stay that night. And Wyandotte and his family gave them a place at their fire. And in the middle of the night, they got up and slew the whole family, children and all, with an axe. And it was after that when the Wyandotte people just realized, this is not working here. Maybe we should take what's being offered to us in Kansas. So they sent out a scouting party, actually a couple scouting parties, to look at lands on the other side of the Mississippi. They didn't like Missouri. They I mean, they liked it, but they didn't like the people that were there. They just felt like, I don't know, there was something about them. They didn't trust them. So they went further, and they crossed over into the Missouri River into Kansas, and found some beautiful land right where the Kansas flowed into the Missouri. And they came back and reported about it to the rest of the Wyandottes. And they said, it's not ideal. It's not like Ohio here. There's only 30, they counted, like 38 sugar maple trees. And, that's a real disappointment, but it seems okay. I think we could live out there, I think. So they made treaties with the United States government, and they waited. They didn't even farm that year because they were expecting to be put on riverboats and taken all the way to Kansas, but nothing happened until the fall when it was really miserable and nasty. And so they didn't have much crops. They're already starting to become dependent on the United States government to feed them at this point. So eventually the time came, and they all marched and took their wagons and their horses, and they made the long trek down to Cincinnati, where they got onto riverboats. And every time they passed through a village, a town, all the people, all the white folks came out and lined the streets to watch the last tribe of Indians leaving Ohio. When they got to Cincinnati, there were crowds in the streets. I mean, it was almost impossible for them to get through to the riverboat. It was so crowded. Everybody wanted to see the Indians, And of course, they were probably disappointed because a lot of them looked like me. These are people that were, they'd been taking captives, raising captives that were from white folks, Cherokees, some of their enemies, and raising them as their own family. So, but anyway, they got on the boats, and the riverboat captain hated them, made it known. They removed all the carpets which these riverboats are brand new at that time. But anyway, they removed all the carpets so the Indians wouldn't stain them. And for the most part, it was a pretty miserable journey. It was very rainy. And so down the Ohio they went, then up the Mississippi till they got to the Missouri. And at the Missouri, they of course turned left and went all the way up and stopped at Independence, Missouri for supplies. And there was interesting, at this time, there was a woman taking notes of the whole adventure, which was pretty interesting. And she was one of the missionary ladies there, but her heart was really to the Wyandotte people. And I guess there was a Wyandotte guy out there on the landing dock, who they were surprised to see. I mean, they're in Independence, Missouri. But anyway, from there they got their supplies. They went to Kansas, and in the middle of a huge downpour of rain, the riverboat captain made him leave the boat. Just in the middle of this huge downpour, he wouldn't wait. He couldn't wait to get him off of his riverboat. So in the middle of this downpour, old people, babies, mothers, young, all different ages were taken off that boat and were just dumped there, basically. And then the riverboat captain had the audacity to just go across the river on the other side and park over there for a while. So anyway, they had a rough year. There's a lot of things I'm obviously leaving out because it's pretty detailed, and it would take a whole nother story. But the Wyandotte who had horses and cattle, and they wanted to keep their cattle, they had to take the trek all the way across the land. They had to herd these cows all the way across. And it was brutal, it was brutal to do that. And they weren't being received very well by the European Americans that they'd find along the way. So the ones who brought their horses arrived in Kansas, and everybody was so happy because now they had at least transportation. They could start plowing, make plans for plowing in the spring. Well, they just made these rough shelters to live in, just whatever they could do. Just cutting down trees, small trees, just bending together these little little huts, and little wigwam type structures to live in past that winter. Over 200 Wyandotte died that winter of disease, sickness, brokenness. It was very, very sad time. And all those people that died were placed on a hill that's in Kansas City today, right in the middle of downtown Kansas City. And it's called the Wyandotte Burial Grounds. And a lot of my ancestors are buried there. And I actually have two uncles buried there too, who were babies when they died. But anyway, that next year when they were trying to find fields to plow, areas where they could clear, they were so dependent on these horses. Well, the Pawnee were making raids on the Shawnee and the Delaware and the Wyandotte. That was what they did, and they would raid and they would steal horses and they'd take them out in the prairie and take them back to their place. To them, that was their way of life, and that was part of their the challenge, of young men, how to prove yourself. But for the Wyandotte, this was just this was horrible. This was something they couldn't allow. And they all met together, and the Wyandotte and the Delaware and the Shawnee, and they said, what are we going to do about this? This is a serious problem for us. I mean, this is life and death for us. What do we do? There was so much anger and, again, brokenness too. And so the people decided, they would wait till the next raid and then they would go after them. And it wasn't long when that happened. And horses were stolen. The report went out among all the villages, and what we call a rashu. A rashu is like a moccasin, they call them. Somebody who would go out and deliver the news, and so he would go from place to place and let everybody know that that there was going to be a war party going on to look for these people who stole their horses. Excuse me. So that morning, one early morning, some Shawnee young men and some elders, there were some Wyandotte young men and elders and some Delaware. They all got together and they found the trail and they started tracking these horses that were stolen. And it was a fairly large group of Pawnee. And so they tracked them out. They tracked them for quite a while and out into the plains of Kansas. And in the distance, they could see what looked like kind of a mesa type thing. And they saw smoke coming from there, and they tracked them right to that mesa. And sure enough, the Pawnee had holed up there, and they realized they were in trouble. So the Wyandotte and the Shawnee and the Delaware, they made a camp down below, and they talked about how they're gonna get them down off of there. What are they gonna do? How they're gonna get their horses back and teach these Pawnee a lesson. Well, there were a couple of attempts to climb up that mesa, and a couple of young men were killed because the Pawnee were rolling big stones down on them when they started coming up that steep slope. Now the anger was really bad, and just people were furious, and they just wanted revenge. They just wanted to just destroy these people. And so they did. They finally mounted an attack when the Pawnee were weakened, probably from being there a couple of days and with no water. They got up on top and they killed the men. They killed them all. And then they killed the women. And then they killed the children. And it was horrible. And then some of the young people, the Braves were up there, the Wyandotte Braves and the Shawnee and the Delaware, and they noticed babies crying. They were still strapped to cradle boards. And they took these cradle boards, the babies in them, and they threw them over the edge of the mesa. There were several that got caught in the trees. And the babies could be heard crying, hanging in those trees, just crying. And so the young men went out with their guns and they just shot him. Horrible thing. The young men went back to camp and reported what had happened. And maybe they felt bad, but they also felt this kind of this lust for power and revenge that comes over people when they have that kind of power, and they got their horses back. They did what they wanted. Well, that evening they were passing around a jug, and a lot of the young men were getting pretty wasted, pretty drunk. And they approached some of the elders, some of the singers, and they said, we want a war dance. We want to express our deeds, what we did, and we want to be able to march around and hit the war post and talk about, how we had this incredible victory. So they want to have a victory dance. And the older men were just kind of quiet, silent. They weren't even looking at the young men. They didn't look very happy, but they pressed them. And they finally took a water drum and they handed it to an old man. They said, sing for us, sing some of those war dances, sing for us. We're going to have war dances. You got to help us out here. And the old man took the drum, a little, this is a clay drum of mine, a little water drum like this. He shook it till the water dampened the hide. And he had everybody sit back. And the old man started to sing. Right about there, some of the young men just jumped up and they came over to him. They said, hey, what are you doing? What are you singing that for? Why are you singing that? That's a woman's honor dance song. Why are you singing these women dance songs? We want a war dance. And the elder got up and he stood up and he put the drum down and he looked at all these young men that were just on fire. And he said, what happened today was dishonorable. This is not the way of our people. What you did here, you're just as guilty as those who forced us out of our homelands. You're just as guilty because you're using your guns to kill people from a distance that you don't know. You're using them. This is not like the way it used to be. In the past, it was more like a martial arts, one man against another, and it was a way to try. But this was just a massacre. Said, we never did that. We never killed women and children, babies. This was unheard of. This was just, we always brought those back and brought them into our community where we adopted them. And the old man pointed to a lot of the young men that were around and says, look at you. Your father was white. Your father was Cherokee. Your father was something else. Your mother was this. Says, we're all of mixed heritage here. And yet you're treating these people as if they're some kind of uki spirit, unclean. So this was wrong. This is not the way it is. There will be no war dance tonight. And with that, the elder just turned his back and walked away and left the young men just standing there looking at each other. And, a couple of them still wanted to do it, but some of the other elders said, no, just let it be. It'll be quiet tonight. And so the older man went back and again, he took the drum and he finished the song and he started to sing that one. And after they sang a number of songs of the war dance, or the women's dance song, the elder stood up and he said, "We honor the women and the children today, those who are on that western path in the sky. We honor those who are killed. We honor those that were killed in the wrong way today." So that next day, when everyone woke up, it was quiet on the trail back, but they brought their horses, and everyone was silent the whole time back, all the way back to their camps. And the story was passed down. It was passed down from family to family, and it's one of these stories. It's a sad story with a awful brutal end to it, but it's one of those. It was reality. Is that our minds were beginning to be changed. Our minds were beginning to be warped. Hutidion rontawa, hutidion rontawa. The people's minds were being taken down. They were being changed. And this is something that we've been trying to reclaim, is those older ways, of seeing, and those older ways of looking at the world that our ancestors had, which has a lot to do with bringing that language back, because within the language, it has the path back to our culture, back to our ways. And I was talking to a Wyandotte brother yesterday, and he was telling me both ways. He said, the culture teaches us about the language teaches us about the culture. He says, when you wrap yourself in the culture again, you can revive these things. And I can't say it's been all bad news, because even there in Kansas, when it was during the time when the Santa Fe Trail started coming through there, the Utah Trail, the Mormon Trail, and the trail to Oregon, these paths all opened up and they all went right through Wyandotte areas and Shawnee areas. Some of the Wyandotte stayed and took advantage of it. They opened up hotels along the river, and some of them, there were Wyandotte who had ferry. They operated a ferry to get people across. And so some of them did okay. Some of them lost all they had by not understanding debt. And, so they lost their lands that they had been given, the allotment lands along the river, some of that nice bottom land that they were farming. And a lot of those ended up going to Oklahoma, and they're here today. My family, some of the family, mine, my mom and her family, they all stayed in Kansas, and they're some of them are still there today, of course, and we're still holding on. But to reclaim, trying to reclaim our culture, some of those things that have dropped away. One of my grandfathers, I believe they're aunts. I believe they were aunts of his, but they were about the same age. And there were two sisters who, actually there were three. One of them was a little more quiet. We didn't hear too much about her, but there was a threat to that cemetery there in Kansas. This happened early in the early 1900s. And these women, they joined together and they built a little house or a little shack there right on the cemetery. And they said, nobody's going to touch our cemetery. This is our sacred grounds here. So they held people off with guns. They actually did. There were times when they wanted to put a pipeline through the cemetery, or whittling off little corners of the cemetery. And these ladies fought to maintain it. And I've actually held that rifle. It's that one of them have. It's from one of their father's old musket. It's an old cap and ball musket, heavy duty. So we have some really wonderful history there. One of the women thought, we can't do this forever. We can't live out here in this little shack on the cemetery all the time. And so she decided the way to fight it was to become a lawyer, and that she's going to take it to the Supreme Court. And she did. She actually did. So her and her sister, they enrolled at one of the law schools there in Kansas that was opening up. And they took in a rowboat, they would row across the Missouri River every morning to go to school. They must have had some kind of cable or something across that river. and then she would take classes. The only woman in the class too, and you can imagine the kind of heckling and stuff she got. They would row back so that her other sister would wait for her until she was done with classes, and then would row back. And she got her degree, and we got pictures of her. That's Lyda Conley. And the first thing she did is to bring a case before the Supreme Court to protect that cemetery. And we have her speech and we have her presentation too. And we're very proud of her. She was the first Native American who brought a case before the Supreme Court, the first lawyer in Kansas. So of the firsts, she was a leader. And my mom remembers them growing up. She remembers they were a little scary to her. My mom said they always dressed in black, those ladies, we finally got protection for that cemetery up there. Although it's been vandalized like crazy, but there's been wonderful things that have happened there. Sad things, but also a rebuilding. But in a lot of that rebuilding, this is where a lot of our cultural practices became lost. So we've been in the middle of restoring and bringing back. So we have started our green corn ceremonies again, which was the biggest ceremony, that it was a huge ceremony that typically was in the middle of August. And yet for transportation reasons and school and all that, we have pushed it back a little bit to September, but we've been doing that for over 10 years now. And there's, it's a chance where everybody comes together, babies are named, people who don't have their names are given their names. We feast together. The special corn soup is made with the deer meat. Songs are being sung, the dances are being danced. We're doing what we can, we're trying to reclaim the language. So a lot of it is happening, and I was reminded yesterday, by my Wyandotte brother from Quebec, who's also working with language recovery. He says, we're like those guys trying to climb the mountain. We see where we want to be. We see that mountain on top, and we're always thinking, man, we're just not getting there. It's just so far away. But he says, sometimes we have to turn around and look back and see how far we've come, and realize. And I know for all of us, we're all dealing with these things in our lives. Sometimes it's important to turn around and look back, see where you've come from, see where you're at, and just remember, it's hard work. We're not promised that it was going to be an easy kind of walk here to do the right thing. It's going to be hard. The journey's hard, but it's good. And if anybody has anything to ask, any questions or anything they want to add, be glad to open it up here.
Feel free to unmute yourself or place something in the chat. Love to hear from you.
Kind of amazed at how much alcohol has made an impact on our people from so far back. And even in Ohio, it started even earlier than that, but it started in Ohio, where it started actually infiltrating the ceremonies, even our ceremonies themselves. And we have stories that were recorded for us in the language, not recorded as an audio, but written down for us. And one of the stories talks about a ceremony that was given, that somebody had a vision for, and it required 35 quarts of whiskey. So even then, even at that time, it's like, the elders, the people did not know how to deal with this thing. They don't have a history with alcoholism. So in some ways, this is one thing that the missionaries really did for our people, which was a very positive thing, was that they put their finger on that and they said, now that is dangerous stuff, what you're playing with there. This is not like something because there were people expressing their interests and saying, wow, I have all these visions when I sleep and all this, and I'm seeing things. And elders they didn't know what to do with that. But the missionary at least, started to say, nah, I mean, they bring in that big black book, that had whole history of alcoholism back all the way down back to Noah, who got drunk, So it's like, this is something that always shows up when there's brokenness too in our communities. And we're extracting ourselves from that too, slowly, with our ceremonial grounds and all those. Fortunately, with the Wyandotte here, it's we're getting a fresh start, so we're able to really keep it pure. It's like a little nursery, it's a place where we're growing a little baby almost. It feels like so we keep it really safe and protected. But anyway, I'll open it up. Anybody want to share something? Go ahead.
Richard, Frank had a question. He is asking if your earrings have any significance.
When I first got my ears pierced was in the 90s, and yeah, it was something I did as sort of a commitment. I started having some very strong, powerful visions in the longhouse, and I started having visions when I was 18, and I didn't quite know what they were at first, except that they were pieces of things. And as I got older and I started doing sweats, the pieces all started fitting together. And I realized I had to make a decision about something. I had to I had to take either the easy path or I had to take the hard path. And I knew the hard path was going to be hard, but I knew it was the good path. And I made that decision. So for me, that's what that was. It was about is getting my ears pierced was for that reason. And back about, I think it was 2014, I was in New Zealand, and I was with a group of Maori artists. We were doing some international indigenous arts work together, and it was great. It was like 2 weeks just working together under a big tent with all these crazy artists. And Maori artists who were doing their moko, their tattoo, their traditional tattoo. And I talked to one of their artists there, and I said, some of my visions, they're kind of fading, they're fading. I just don't think about them anymore. And so I said, I'd really like to get it on my arm. I'd like to be able to wear it so that it's always there. I don't have to worry about it slipping away. And I knew this was the context I want. It's not like I wanted to go down to some local, shop down, in the city and just have some guy that does bikers, put ink in my arm. I wanted somebody who was really sensitive to traditional ways. And so we did it right there under their longhouse, right under the eaves of that longhouse. And I laid down, and he took out the bird bone tools. They're like little hoes. They look like a little hoe. It's kind of like a little forked stick. Tap it in. So he tapped it all in my arm there. So those are another thing too, is bringing back some of those traditions too. It's not that my design is a traditional design, but bringing back those kind of arts too, though.
I have a question. I'm showing up with an S as Sharon, but I coming in from Cape Cod, and I actually work right now in Mashpee. We relocated, in fact, from Falmouth, Massachusetts to Mashpee, and my organization is habitating the basement of the Mashpee Housing Authority, but we are also in the neighborhood and front yard of the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe. And that's one of the major reasons I keep hooking up with these types of events through the Native American emphasis, if you will, whatever. But a lot of it's coming from different tribes. I'm a white female in America, I'm not a member of the tribe. However, they were recently considering adding board members from the Mashpee Wampanoag because we're so close, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, the work I do on a part-time basis for the organization is in the recovery field, and so that's why my interest, because I would like to be. I'm doing a nurturing families and treatment and recovery workshop right now for just the general population, if we call it that. But because of the Mashpee tribe being there, in fact, I went to the Massachusetts has a organization that's part of the Department of Public Health, that's BSAS, which is the Bureau of Substance Abuse Services, et cetera, et cetera. And they had something recently, and someone raised the question of, well, we're right next door to the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe, and the moderator or host or co-host said, well, actually, you are at their front door. You're not their neighbor. You are their visitor, if you will, and that's so I know for regardless of Native heritage or not, like myself, there is a huge problem on Cape Cod with alcoholism as the main, even more than fentanyl and opioids, even though we've had that too. So, I'm like, okay, fine. So if, in fact, I were to gear a recovery workshop toward the population whose doorstep I am upon, that's why I want to hear this stuff. My question, I'm sorry for the long segue, but the question is more like, when I have the opportunity to give myself exposure to the storytelling like today, or the whatever the case is that I sign up for, it's not necessarily, particularly regionally, the Wampanoag tribe. And I guess my bottom line question is, how familiar and how relevant is your storytelling as a member of a different tribal area, tribal nation, tribal group, different from what I might hope to learn about the neighbors, so to speak? Is that making sense, the question? It's just like it's like, to me, it's it obviously there's going to be similarities, but at the same time, when I look at my ethnic heritage, I'm Irish, Roman Catholic kind of thing, or I could be one step away from being a WASP, which is a terrible acronym for, white Anglo-Saxon, but I'm not the same as my tribal neighbors, if you will. So what I want to do by going to these things is understand, and I do, believe me, I do from the get-go. Even the reason in listening to your stories is like, hey, this is intent. This is important. If I can approach a recovery group and talk about, oh, I had a bunch of guys come up to me and they wanted effing war stories, but I wanted to give them woman stories, and let me tell you about. I guess I'm asking, how closely relevant is one tribal, regional workshop, learn my lesson enough, or how should I be focusing on trying to go to my neighbors, knock on the door and say, look, I want storytelling from your perspective, because I want to work with you people, and I only have it from the storytelling perspective of this man I listened to at 3:47 p.m. on such and such a day, but he was out there in the middle of the country where I've never been.
Yeah. Well, I think what you said in the beginning, is that just recognizing, that you're at the front door, of this one nation, and, to show honor by, just actually welcoming your, coming and saying, I'm here and I'd like to help if I can. And I'm here, and just making yourself available and asking them what they need. What do they need?
Yeah.
That's,
Yeah.
it's, I can't speak for them, you know.
Yeah. No, I hear you. It's kind of like, you know, it's even the approach like, oh, well, you know, aren't I conveniently located? Because I'm neighboring the Wampanoag. I'm like, no, you're not neighboring. You're the visitor. You know, you're the guest. You're not the host. They need to be the hosts. You know, and so I hear you, and I suppose that being equipped with saying, all right, here's what I know about storytelling, because I listened to this man and I attended this webinar, and I want it to be you. You know, I don't want it to be that group in particular. I want it to be everything and anything storytelling wise, to the point that you can identify a tree in your story that's outside of your home or office or wherever it might be. You know what I mean? It's like I want it that close. I want it that familiar. And so you more or less have in a sense answered the question, which I sort of almost knew. Was like, well, wait a minute. No, this is that group. So here I am. Here's what I know. It's kind of dislocated right now because it's like 3,000 miles away. So bring it home. You know, I want to be 300 yards away, not 3,000 miles away from what you need, you want, you are as my host. I humbly come to your front door to say, here's what I could do as a, some might call crazy white woman, but here's what I could do, but I need you. I need you. And I need your permission because because I am where you are. I am on your homestead. So I don't want to be the intruder. I want to be the guest openly welcome because I have such a desire to understand.
Yeah.
Very much, Karen.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks for your thoughts. And
Richard, we had, I know Frank posted another question in the chat, and I was wondering if Frank M, if you might want to unmute and ask Richard this question, because I'm not sure I fully understand it, but would you be willing to ask Richard this question?
Yeah, you know, we all know the effects of alcoholism on, you know, all tribal populations. I'm just curious of Richard's experience with his people, you know, the Wyandottes. Do you see any current movement towards sobriety? And maybe you're familiar with the Wellbriety movement by Don Coyas. Do you see that, I don't know, catching on? How's it going? Recovery.
yeah, I think we've all got our family stories, you know, and for me, my grandfather in Kansas, when he was young, he went off to join the Navy, and he was setting aside money back home. He's sending money back home to put in a bank account that when he came out of the service, he would have some money to buy that 40 acres that he always wanted, you know, down in Oklahoma, a place where he could have a little farm, you know, and raise his crops. By the time he got out of the service and came home, he found out his bank account was cleaned out by his father, who had basically drank away all the money. And so we all have those stories, you know. I personally, you know, didn't have a lot of, my father would have a beer once in a while, you know. It never was, I never saw a lot of drunkenness when I was really small. So I guess I kind of grew up with a more of a responsible view of how you're supposed to. Not that I was always responsible, but it is something that's cast a long shadow. And I don't want to speak to. I can just say some of the Longhouse people in this area have, you know, been under its spell for a long time, and it's kind of almost become a part of the ceremonies even. it was almost expected that people would get a little loaded before they picked up the drum. These things are all changing now. And I think it's a really good thing, And, we're seeing some of these issues, like you're talking about the Wellbriety. When people come together and they can talk together, share their experiences, share their hurts, share their own pains, how they were hurt by these things, it starts to break that cycle, because these are cycles. There are things that once they start, it's like abuse. It's like any kind of abuse, whether it's physical or sexual. These things become cycles. So it starts, a path starts happening, and it all goes underground. There's so much of it's secret, the secretive stuff. And I think maybe alcohol becomes less secret at times, but these are all things we've had to address and just put our finger on, and we can't hide anymore about it. We have to say, our people have a problem with this. This is killing our people. This is preventing us from being the people we're supposed to be. So, we're dealing with it here too. It's, I don't belong to a group or anything at this point, where I'm actually sharing, other than right here with you guys. And I mean, doing these kind of programs, when we have maybe somebody coming through and they're talking about, violence against women. These are things that we need to take part in. We need to listen to we need to go whenever we hear their speakers, talking about that kind of issue. And we need to be ready to share what we can, and stories that were, in the past, men used to get up and brag about their war exploits. Maybe it's time for young men to take pride in standing up and saying, telling a time when they were able to stand between a man and a woman and be able to keep some violent act from happening, and be really proud of that. Talk about that and just take really pride in that he was there, to pull that guy off, or keep that violence from happening. Maybe there's some new traditions, that need to be thought of. Have a chance for people to stand up and take pride in how they stop something from happening.
We have a kind of a movement in the recovery world, and believe it or not, it's called storytelling. And we tell our recovery stories, and we share our experiences there with what you just said, with the hope that may change things. So it's the storytelling's catching on in the recovery world, thank God.
For sure, yeah.
And I think during this time of COVID, where families are spending more time together, I think that part of it can be a good thing, because grandmother can still watch the children and comment on their behavior and maybe help guide. And it's a time where what I'm hearing is there's more storytelling happening.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Richard, I appreciate the comments. Got a little bit of time left. I know Jim Weichel had his hand up earlier. I saw the little hand icon.
Mhm.
Jim, you want to say something?
Yep. I don't know where he is, but I'll say, because I unmuted myself accidentally. But I was glad to hear that the storytelling idea is catching on. The last person speaking was mentioning the recovery world, but in general, it just makes me think about. I took a genealogy course at a local library, and one of the things that was so emphasized is, if you're sitting around and your 87-year-old mother or grandmother or whatever the case might be is around, you need to talk to them. Talk to them and get the information. Even if you're trying to establish your roots and who came over on what ship for me, and you all don't have that particular concern because you were here. but that idea that what they have to say, you need to ask them when they're able to say it. When you are able to ask and they are able to say it, And, pre-COVID, that just tended to mean general old age, die of natural causes, live to be 102 like my grandma did. And I probably didn't talk to her enough, although I talked to her more than some. But it's like, hey, we're all in this. What do we have to know? We have to know that the person I'm looking at, this man who's giving a wonderful presentation, or my landlady who's going to create Thanksgiving because I can't go anywhere else, is whomever it is. You need to talk to those people while they're there, because you miss the opportunity to catch so much. And even if you're a research scientist who's exploring all of these literary articles and whatever the case might be to try to figure it all out, there is no better source than the person who preceded you in your heritage. There is stories of the heritage, there are stories of the generational traumas, there are stories of how the hell did you all cope with that crap years ago? Because even though things are improved right now, they still suck. They suck. I'm sorry for what might be considered bad language, but there is so much work to be done, and the only way we're going to do it is to open our eyes to those people. And the only way I'm going to open my eyes to my own heritage is talking, talk, which is storytelling, isn't it? Oh gosh, I've come around 180 degrees, so I better shut up now. Bye.
Yeah. Jan, we got a couple more minutes.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, first of all, Skeno Swagwego. It's good to see Richard. Good to see all of you. The reason I've been running back and forth is I am also in a meeting simultaneously about this very subject. And we were talking about, I guess they just got a huge grant and I got to figure out how to spend it. And I went back to when I first came to this job. And I came here in February of this year. And I work for the Iowa people, the Iowa tribe of Oklahoma. My own nation is the Onondaga Gagahono, Seneca Cuga. And I came here thinking I had answers, which is rather arrogant, you know. And then one day, a coworker, I'd only been here about a week or so, took me to the tribal complex to introduce me around. And she took me to this one office, and it was a lady that works in the records, and she's an elder. And when I told her I was here to help address the addiction and behavioral health issues in the community, and to maybe hope to encourage to use cultural practices to do that, she almost cried. And then she took almost 2 hours to tell me the whole story of the Iowa people, from their creation story right up to where they're at now. And so we're having this meeting, and they've been given this grant, and it's about a community project. And they wanted my input because I'm leaving here in a week. I've been called elsewhere. So I went back to that very beginning. I said, you need to go talk to this elder. She knows all the stories. She's one of the few ones that knows the language. And you need to go there with a humble heart and ask her if she would serve as the elder advisor for this project. And that way you can get the community, because tribal politics are involved. You know, if you know anything about tribal politics, you know they're vicious. If you think the current election was vicious, you ought to see tribal elections. Anyway, but even the members of the business committee here that fight about a lot of things will respect this elder. And if you can get the elders and the youth involved, then you can reach the parents. And all I have to do is go ask them to tell stories. So anyway, probably said very little in a lot of words, but that's what we've been talking about.
Oh, Jim. Well, we are at the top of the hour, and I do want to thank everyone for joining us today. We're going to reconvene again for another story with Richard in 2 weeks. So everybody have a good rest of the week, and we'll make sure that we get an announcement out for the next broadcast. So until then, please stay safe, stay healthy, and stay connected. We'll see you again in 2 weeks. Take care, everyone.
Yeah. And the next time I'll be talking about more of a traditional story, one of our traditional Wyandotte stories, and it's a good lesson story. It's actually a story that you could tell, you could share with other people as long as it's given credit to the Wyandotte people. But it's a good one. It's a good warning story too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Thanks everybody for listening, for coming.
Thank you, Richard, for sharing and for all that attended today and participated. So thank you, everyone. Take care.
Okay, I'll be on the road for the next one, but I'll see you at the one after, Richard.
All right. Okay.
We'll try and carry on, Jim, without you.
I'm sure you can.
We'll figure out a way. I promise.
I'm sure you can. So, okay. On
Okay,
again.
safe travels.